Welcome to Reality Check. Before we start with this week's show, here's a little bit about this week's sponsor. Dr. Stephen Gundry has a warning about your breakfast and a breakfast breakthrough to share in a video you can watch. Dr. Gundry, a heart surgeon in California, learned that if you break your nightly fast by eating breakfast foods with something called MCTs, or medium chain triglycerides, you can keep burning fat throughout the day and use it for energy. But there are specific types of food that contain these MCTs, and if you can watch his video, you'll learn all about it. Using this breakfast breakthrough, he was able to lose 70 pounds just through diet, and he did this in his 60s. So watch and learn more about it at thehealthyfat.com/Ross. It's linked at the bottom of this video. Once again, thehealthyfat.com/Ross. Now let's get on with the show. Hello and welcome back to Reality Check. And we have a guest back with us this week who I'm delighted to welcome, Tim Gallaudet. He's an American oceanographer and retired Rear Admiral in the US Navy. He's worked at an extremely senior level in the US government, including as the Assistant Secretary of Commerce for Oceans and Atmosphere. He was the oceanographer for the entire US Navy, working in the Pentagon, advising the Chief of Naval Operations. He worked also as the acting administrator and deputy administrator of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, otherwise known as NOAA, during the Trump administration. And NOAA's the nation's leading ocean weather and climate agency. I think Tim's shown rare courage as a former senior public official with his willingness to speak openly, publicly and candidly about what he knows on the UAP and USO issue. We've already interviewed him previously here about how he's seen footage of UAPs while he was in service with the US Navy. And I really admire him because he's expressed support for people like David Grush, Lou Elizondo, Christopher Mellon, who've made claims pushing for destigmatization of the UAP issue. Now, Tim's written a biography to be released in 2025 called Holding Fast in Heavy Seas, which he tells me is not intended to be an exhaustive memoir, but rather to provide lessons on leadership during challenging circumstances, which is quite apt, frankly, for his involvement with UAP at the moment. Tim's, in a few days, going to be giving evidence before the Oversight and Accountability Committee in the US House of Reps. It's quite historic to see somebody of his seniority, somebody who's been at a very high rank inside the US military, speaking candidly on what he knows on UAPs. So I guess, Tim, my first question to you is, are you a little bit nervous about this appearance? How do you feel?
Well, thank you, Ross. It's great to be on your show. And no, I'm not nervous at all. Actually, it's probably could be 10th, 12th hearing. So I've testified a few times in front of Congress. And actually, my previous testimonies have been under a little more contentious circumstances where I was trying to defend a budget that maybe the Congress members weren't happy about. So this is not worrisome. There's bipartisan support for UAP disclosure, and I'm proud and happy to be a champion for that.
Can I ask you this, sir? Have you at any stage have somebody come and sidle up to you quietly in a corridor somewhere and say, I say, Tim, it'd be really good if you just piped down a little bit on this issue. You know, stop rocking the boat on the UAP issue. I guess as a journalist, I'm very used to people from, say, the defence or intelligence community coming up to somebody like me, a journo operating at senior level, and saying, listen, there's things you don't know about that it would be really helpful if you could just not focus too much on that issue because it's raising issues of national security sensitivity. Has anyone ever given you the tap to say, please don't rock the boat on the UAP issue?
Well, let me give you two stories here. First off, I've had numerous people who were in the government come to me and say, I need to tell you my story. Here's what I saw. And these are people that in all types of different branches of the US government that were witnesses, that were experiencers of the phenomena that wanted to come to me because of my speaking out, knowing I have some kind of authority and credibility, and they trusted me. And I was the first person they ever came to. I'm talking about submarine officers, former aircraft carrier, naval personnel, and even people from my former agency, NOAA, who served on our ships, who had experiences. So there's that, which is fascinating to me, and encouraging for me to continue doing what I'm doing, knowing that I'm giving people some inspiration and courage to come out. But the other aspect about people or anybody in the government saying, Tim, tamp it down. No, no one's ever done that. But I did visit with the Department of Defense's Aldermain Anomaly Resolution Office last year. And now, first of all, they're under new leadership. And I make no comments on the current new leadership. I've not met with the new director. I understand there might be a change of course, which I would be happy to see. But when I met with the prior leadership, and they invited me, and in fact, they said, hey, we want to share with you what we're doing. I was a bit disappointed because they didn't tell me to not say what I was saying. What they did is they tried to defend a lot of the false narratives they were promoting. And we all know this. We know the historical records report that they issued, that Chris Mellon subsequently in the debrief wrote an article basically chastising and calling out. And they defended that tooth and nail. And I couldn't believe it, actually. I thought, because Chris did a good job. We all know his credibility. And they basically proceeded to carry out an influence operation on me because they know I have access and influence. And so they work to persuade me, oh, this report we wrote is solid, incredible. And I asked him, what did you think of Chris Mellon's article? And they told me he was off the mark and in more colorful language. And I couldn't believe it, to be honest with you. And they defended their approach, and it was clear to me this was part of their overall, we know this, disinformation campaign against people like us who are coming out to advocate for UAP disclosure.
Can I ask you this, Tim? Why? Why would a body that has been essentially ordered by Congress to do proper investigations into anomalous phenomena and to report back to Congress and the American public, why would it do what I think we both agree it has been doing, and I do hope under the new leadership it does change its tone? Why would they seek to disinform and manipulate not only American public opinion, but also to try and influence somebody with your reputation and background?
Well, first off, they yes, this is troubling, of course. Now I can only speculate because they didn't tell me, of course. But I've been in the government for almost 40 years, and I understand. And I had a clearance. I still have a clearance actually now. But I believe that office. Now you're right, and here's an important distinction. Congress gave them an unclassified mandate. They did not give them a classified mandate. The legislation said, let's go and report on and study the occurrences of UAP. And they've done that to an extent, but this historical records report was disinformation, as clear as day. And so that is not in their charter. And that's what's so troubling, is they're not following the intent of Congress. And that's why, thus, you're seeing hearings get scheduled and members are not too happy. Now, and hopefully the new leadership is a sign that, okay, they're going to get on board with that. My understanding is this, and now the director at the time, the acting director, came to me, and he made it very clear to himself. He said, I'm a Title 50 guy. And what he means is that this counterintelligence was his expertise. And it's I assume and I assess, I guess, that they want to protect American national security interests. They don't want, and again, I'm speculating, okay, but but I know how the government operates. They don't want, and this is why we've classified UAP in history, because we don't want our adversaries to know our weaknesses, that what we can and can't see, that we cannot control our airspace and water space. And I get that. That's important. But with the Schumer amendment, that genie's out of the bottle. Okay, so we really need to set up and say, okay, look, let's not disclose the classified information technology-wise that we're learning about UAP. I'm okay with that. We don't want that to go to the American public or our adversaries. But the American public has a right to know the new nature of reality we know, and that the Defense Department and the intelligence community has realized and has evidence of. That's not fair to the American public or the global citizenry at large. So I think this is what has to come out.
So, Tim, you've told this story to Reality Check before, but for the benefit of our audience who don't know how you came to the UAP issue, it's one of the stories you tell in your book, and I'd love you to tell it again. What was it that sparked your awareness that, frankly, we are not alone?
Right. Yeah. It's a giant story, right? Because this is what we're talking about. We know and we have evidence that we are not alone in the universe in terms of intelligent life. It's insane. And why is there not more intellectual curiosity on this? Well, it's because the government's covered it up. But ultimately, my journey started out first when I was the superintendent of the Naval Observatory, and I worked with a team of astrophysicists, and I learned how large the universe is. It's 100 billion to 400 billion stars in the Milky Way alone. We know many of them have habitable planets around them. And that's just in this galaxy. And there's up to maybe 1 trillion other galaxies in the observable universe. It's just, space is so vast. It's just so naive and myopic to think that we're the only intelligent species and a species that's developed a means to travel between celestial bodies. Avi Loeb of the Galileo Project, and I'm a research affiliate with him, articulates this extremely well about the scales of time and space. And it's really ridiculous to assume we're just it. But so I had that sort of awareness and openness from my experience there as the superintendent of the Naval Observatory, learning about astrophysics. Then fast forward a few more years, as a one-star admiral in charge of all the Navy meteorologists and oceanographers, I am overseeing these people who are on aircraft carriers and exercises and operations around the world. A lot of them on aircraft carriers. And at that point, when the Theodore Roosevelt was conducting an exercise off the U.S. East Coast, and aviators were seeing all these UAP, aviators like Ryan Graves, I didn't know about it until I get this email on the Navy's secret network. And I'm the chief meteorologist of the Navy at the time. And so my aerographers and meteorologists are forecasting weather on that ship and every other ship on the Navy that does air operations. And I get this email, and the title of it, in all caps on the secret network, Urgent Safety of Flight Issue. And in the body of the email, the text just merely read, hey, if any of you know what these are, tell me ASAP. We're having numerous near mid-air collisions, and we might have to shut down the exercise. And that got my attention because this is my job, safety of flight. And attached to the email was the now leaked and declassified Go Fast video. And my socks were knocked off. I mean, of course, because I've never seen something like this. I wasn't read into the programs and all that. And of course, I knew immediately that was us because we don't do test and development in training ranges. It's when an aircraft carrier goes through a training workup to go then deploy to, for example, the Arabian Gulf, we don't do test and evaluation during those things because it is so compressed. The combatant commanders want the ship to get out there on time. The aviators, every pilot's got to get certified to fly on the carrier. Okay, it is stressful. We don't mess around in the U.S. Navy on that kind of thing. That's why we have test ranges in different places to do that. Ross, your question.
So I just wanted to, I suppose, underline the point that you're making there. What you're anticipating is the explanation that many debunkers offer, that this must be secret US technology. That the Go Fast, the Tic Tac, and I've forgotten the name of the other one momentarily, but those three videos that were released eventually by the New York Times, by Leslie and Ralph Blumenthal, that those videos were somehow some secret program that the US was suppressing. From your understanding of the secret world and how it works, the US would never test technology like that without giving authorization to, say, the Rear Admiral in charge of the fleet that you were with and that the Theodore Roosevelt was with.
Not a chance. And when you look at the whole body of those observations, remember the pilots talking about a fleet of them, and there were different observations. There was the gimbal, the go fast. It's not a chance in the world. And let's go back to the Nimitz, okay, with Dave Fravor and Alex Dietrich, and that again. This is what's even more ridiculous. So when I met with Aero, okay, and this has to go out there. They were trying to throw some discredit on the reports of the Nimitz Tic Tac incident. Okay, they questioned me. Oh, this might have been U.S. tech. You've heard that narrative out there. Maybe it was a submarine. And you talk to David Fravor and Alex Dietrich, who I consider my friends now, who served on aircraft carriers like I did. And all the explanation of instantaneous acceleration and meeting at the cap point, that they knew was that demonstrated a knowledge of what they knew and intelligent control. This is not U.S. tech, okay? Not a chance. We don't test stuff in training ranges, and clearly the performance characteristics of the technology was nothing like we could design. And I trust them, and they were the observers. So when those who are trying to throw a wrench in that narrative they are so off the mark, and it's actually just a clear sign they're stretching this disinformation effort.
So one thing I also want to get the detail from you on is that CIPRANet message, that secret message that came across your email. It was essentially framed as a safety of flight issue, wasn't it? Because this was essentially the commander of that battle fleet wanting to know, did anybody know about these objects? What the hell were they?
Right. So the message I got was from the operations officer who worked for the commander, who was a 4-star. The operations officer was a 2-star, and he sent it to all the subordinate commanders who were 1 and 2 stars and senior executives. And so of course we were all alerted. This is a big deal. What are they? The interesting thing, I know now what happened is that, so the next day, that email was wiped from my computer. I never saw it again. And then every meeting I went to at the headquarters, which I did to every month, no one talked about it. And that's
so. Did you ever try and raise it? Did you ever sort of say, "Excuse me,
no.
What about that Go Fast?"
Yeah, well, right, and that was my job, safety of flight. So I could have and maybe should have, but I knew how things work. When it was wiped from my computer, I knew instantly. Okay, and I've seen this in other areas where someone divulged classified information on an unclassified system, and there's a procedure for that where you basically don't talk about that. You remove all the data, you do damage control to make sure our adversaries don't get that information. And yeah.
So crucially, that was what told you that this was known about to the US government. It's not US tech, but they clearly know about it.
Well, I also have done a little research, so I'll tell you this. So it was wiped from my computer. At the time, I didn't know what agency had authority over that information, but I assumed it was under a special access program, and it was. And what happened is, through sources I have, that there was a concern that was there was a question: was it adversary tech, or was it unknown origin tech? And that's why they pulled the email, is because they didn't know. And if it was adversary tech, that would have been a big problem. And so they didn't want it going out on a secret network when that should have been more classified, top secret, even compartmentalized if it was adversary tech. And so that's legitimate. That now I realize that's fair. It's still not good that the safety of flight issue that we the commanders, the admirals in charge of all the operations and the people had to basically shut up about it, and we forced the pilots to mitigate the safety threat on their own. And that's why I've come out, is that that's wrong. We need to openly acknowledge that this is out there, and not just in the military, but civil. That's what Ryan Graves is doing with Americans for Safe Aerospace, and I'm on his advisory board. Is we just got to open up and be clear-eyed about the safety concerns, the security concerns, and the potential benefits in terms of research and development. So, but yeah.
There's a great moment in your book where, and I laughed at the irony of this, where I think it's Dick Cheney, when he was a very senior official in the administration. He was the guy at your graduation ceremony from the Naval Academy who literally handed over your graduation certificate. And correct me if I'm wrong, is that the point where you, as an officer, swear an oath to the US Constitution?
Whoa, actually, Ross, I'm glad you got that far. But so, and this is interesting to me because that was I had been in for 4 years at the Naval Academy. You actually swear your oath to the Constitution on your very first day there. So your first day as a freshman, and it's not even a freshman, you actually go through a summer boot camp, and then you become a freshman and you enroll or you start classes. So your first day there, the summer boot camp before your 4 year undergraduate experience, is where you swear your oath to the Constitution. I did that in 1985 with my dad, who was a reserve captain, and I just got to do that with my daughter this last July, who is now in her first year at the academy.
No,
But that's where you swear an oath. And then Dick Cheney, though, gave me my commission, which
right.
was, okay,
Gotcha.
you're no longer a midshipman, you're now an officer in the Navy.
So the reason I wanted to ask you that question is because I think this is tied in with why you're taking such a strong leadership position on the UAP issue. And I want you to explain to our audience. When you're an officer, or when anyone joins the military, they swear an oath to the US Constitution. And Article 1 of the US Constitution enshrines a very noble idea that the executive arm of government, everything in the executive arm of government, is accountable to Congress. And that's enshrined in your beautiful document, that document that we don't have in English law in Australia here or in the UK where I was born. Essentially, the Constitution enshrines a very noble idea that there is accountability to the Congress. And the thing that really strikes me about this whole UAP issue, at the heart of it, is that there's been a failure, an abrogation of accountability, that somewhere along the line, a decision has been made that Congress and even presidents won't be read into whatever this secret is that they're covering up about unidentified anomalous phenomena. Now, I don't want to lead you, I don't want to take you in that path unless you're comfortable doing it, but is your oath to the US Constitution intrinsic to why you're taking a leadership role on this issue?
100%, Ross. I dedicated my life to this, and I believe in the document, and again I served for nearly 40 years under that oath, and that's exactly what's going on. Is that this UAP cover-up and secrecy is absolutely disregarding that element of the Constitution. It's unconstitutional. And it gets to the extent in some cases where unelected officials are overseeing these programs that are being hidden from Congress, and they're being prevented from their oversight responsibilities. And that's just such a problem. It's ridiculous. It's insane. Yes, exactly. It is my life of service and oath to the Constitution is absolutely what's driving this. I mean, in addition to a number of other factors like intellectual curiosity. We're not alone. This is the story of the century, as I talked to you about last year. And why are we not? Why are more Americans not talking about it? And I'll make this point, okay? So a lot of people are wondering what's going to happen. Is the government just going to keep control? It's not politically savvy under whoever gets elected in the Americans 2024 election to acknowledge we can't control our airspace and water space, and we're being visited by entities we don't even know their intent. Okay, that's not really politically good for any administration. However, the more constituents that want to know and want their elected officials to disclose, the more it will be politically favorable. So that's what we need to be doing. And so I applaud you and your journalistic expertise and efforts to get this out there. And the more we do this, and you've looked at this trajectory, it's almost amazing what's happened in the last decade, last 5 years. And so let's keep this up. The hearing I will be a part of in a few weeks, and every other next step is going to only increase that.
Now, what's the question that you'd most like Nancy Mace to ask you in the forthcoming oversight hearing? What's the thing that should most be drawn out of you?
I can't talk about that right now. Sorry, Ross. Dave asked me
You can't
to
blame me for trying.
No, all good. I'm glad you did. I brought it up. It's good. But no, we're still working that out, and that will all come out. And again, I mean that's pretty high profile. I got that. I'm taking it very seriously. But when asked, I absolutely said yes because I think it's the right thing to do. And so I'm excited and proud to be able to represent that issue in front of the American people.
You did mention that you've had people approaching you, and I'm fascinated with some of those stories because I've heard a few of these myself. I was talking to an old submariner from the Australian Onslow submarine fleet, who,
Really?
and they were telling me that they detected on sonar an object moving unbelievably at close to the speed of sound underwater. And I said, that can't possibly be right. Have you heard stories like that from submariners?
I've heard one, and interestingly, and it's very credible, and interesting. But this is important. Okay, I think we all have to make sure we're clear-eyed about this, and so about observations and witness accounts. And I'm not discrediting anybody or throwing a lot of sensationalism either way. But here's something I learned from a young submariner is that, and I've been on a sub twice, but for small, short duration cruises. But I didn't know this, that the acoustic sensors on submarines can detect aircraft if they're at low altitude. So, okay, if you got a helicopter, so they're very noisy, by the way, going 100 knots, well then oh my gosh, if you're an untrained sonar operator and you see a helicopter going at 100 knots, you might think that's something anomalous. Well, not really. So it's important when you hear reports to make sure you fact check and you get all the information you can. Now, the one report I have is clearly not an aircraft because this individual submariner was in the 1980s operating in the North Atlantic at a deeper depth during a very significant North Atlantic storm where there's a high ambient noise level. So there was nothing this contact could be confused with. And it had all the signatures of a Russian torpedo because it approached at rapid rate, but then it slowed down, which torpedoes don't do. And they thought because of its rapid rate of approach, they went to crush depth. That was their SOP, standard operating procedure, because they really believed it was a Soviet sub launching an attack on them, which is insane. It was an old sub too. They were not happy doing that and not comfortable. And so his story went like that. And then, of course, this object, now it stopped and it went around to their stern and followed them and then rapidly accelerated out of the scene. Now, back in the 80s, we know of no technology that could have done that. What was that? So it wasn't a helicopter. It wasn't a misidentification with something like that. That was the anomalous report that I got from this submariner, and I can't explain it either. And I've heard there's others, but submarine information and operations are so highly classified with non-disclosure agreements signed by everybody on the force that they're hard to come out and find.
But I guess the point that you're making there is a very important one because the risk of misunderstanding, the risk of interdiction issues underwater are as acute as they are for people like, Ryan Graves and FA-18, F-22 pilots in the air, that essentially it could only be one mistake where, say, an American submariner commander or a Russian submariner commander basically thinks, holy hell, we're being attacked by a Russian submarine or an American submarine. It could start World War III if we don't know for sure what those objects are. And that's why it's so important that we explain what these objects are. Is that something you agree with?
I do. I absolutely agree that we need to research these more and get a better understanding for them for both the national security implications and as well as just the science and potential technology advancements we can make from them. So yeah, and in fact, I've begun a correspondence with Robert Hastings, who's well known for his book UFOs and Nukes, and I mean, yeah, that is well researched and fairly accepted now that we know this about these interactions. And it's interesting to me because I wouldn't call it a coincidence, but what an interesting correlation there is where we see so many potential interactions of UAP and nuclear ships. So I just gave you a nuclear subs example, but we have the Nimitz and the Theodore Roosevelt. I personally have heard an extraordinary story from a chief petty officer on the USS Enterprise, or Eisenhower, pardon me, Eisenhower, the ship that was recently in the Red Sea combating the Houthis. This ship on an earlier deployment about 20 years ago, the senior leadership, this petty officer, chief petty officer, all witnessed a UAP in the middle of the strike group, basically. And this, I know I think you're looking into this, Ross.
Yeah, I know the guy you're talking about, and I mean,
yeah,
basically, what he describes is he's a group of 7 people standing on the flybridge near the bridge,
correct.
looking down at. They were looking at takeoffs and landings on the
Right.
aircraft carrier,
Something
but
I've done quite a bit.
and they looked across to, I think it was a cruiser-shaped or
Yes,
cruiser-sized ship, and there was a gigantic craft hovering over the top of that ship
that's right.
that all of them saw. And I'm still in the process of trying to verify that to corroborate this gentleman's account. But I'm really pleased he's reached out to you because I'd like to see his evidence taken. And one of the dilemmas, Tim, I'll be honest with you, is I don't feel safe bringing people like that to ARROW, to the Pentagon's UAP investigation office, because under the previous leadership, I think it discredited itself by allowing itself to be perceived, rightly or wrongly, as an organization that was only interested in disinformation. So there are many people like that serviceman that you've mentioned who would like to come forward with very, very credible accounts. And the dilemma is, where do they go?
Right. That's right. I know a good number of people like him that do not trust Arrow right now based on their past uh, actions. But ultimately, I'm going to give the new leadership an opportunity. I'm not gonna characterize where they are now. Either way, I have friends who vouch for that individual, and so I'm. In fact, now that my clearance is reinstated, I'm looking forward to meeting with them and seeing what they might have to say and where they might be going in the future.
So, Tim, one of the things that I think distinguished David Grush's testimony, along with Ryan Graves and Dave Fravor, was that they all gave evidence and insisted on giving evidence under oath. They swore an oath. Would you be prepared to do that when you give evidence to the Congress?
No, of course, I will have to swear an oath. That's just the procedure, and I will. I mean, that's just by nature. I'm going to do that and tell the truth and swear to it. I've never gone out in public as a government official intending to do otherwise. So yes.
So you've said previously as well that you would quite like to see, as well as yourself, you'd like to see Lou Elizondo deposed under oath, as well as Christopher Mellon, where in a public hearing they could be asked what they know in a way that allows them to speak for the first time publicly about the full truth of what they know within, obviously, national security constraints. Now, to my knowledge, Lou and Chris, they're not being asked to give evidence at this hearing. Is that a disappointment for you?
I don't know. I still don't know who the final list of witnesses will be. And I won't characterize that as a disappointment. It's, first of all, whatever the committee wants to do, they'll do. And whatever Chris and Lou or any other witness decides to do or not is their decision. So I'm not going to characterize that either way. I don't think it's appropriate. By the way, Lou's published a terrific book Chris has been this incredible advocate and on the Hill and with others in the DoD and the Congress. So those two individuals, we can't give enough praise for the courage they've shown and the work that they've undertaken. So I'll just leave it at that. That we should be grateful for what they've done for our country, because a lot of what our discussions now and my being here with you today probably wouldn't be possible without what they too have done.
Absolutely. So you tell a great story about how you met astronaut Scott Carpenter in your book. And you recall President John F. Kennedy's 1962 speech at Rice University, where he told a crowd of people that American astronauts would land on the moon by the end of the decade. And you talk with some emotion, I think, about the fact that Carpenter had actually done an underwater survey. He'd done an extraordinary piece of research underwater, where he'd stayed underwater for a huge amount of time. And it made you think of the famous line in JFK's speech that we choose to go to the moon in this decade and do other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. And you talk in your book about the irony of how Carpenter told you that exploring space is a cakewalk compared to doing the same in the ocean. And it really underlines the point that you're making in your book, and you've made in a lot of your public commentary, that what you've learned as an oceanographer is how unexplored our oceans are, and is a large part of the UAP mystery, you believe, in our oceans.
I do, and I've written a white paper on this for the Sol Foundation, their first white paper. This Sol Foundation is the Stanford-based think tank that is advocating for more UAP research and policy development, and which I wholeheartedly support. And in this paper I wrote titled "Beneath the Surface, we may learn more about UAP by looking under the ocean than otherwise." And I state this exactly, that we've only mapped about 25% of the ocean seafloor on this planet, and we've not even explored 5%, maybe, or not 10%, or between 5 and 10 of the ocean volume with a remotely operated vehicle, which is extraordinary that we don't even know that much about our own ocean. And I knew this from my job at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And our program to explore the ocean was one of my favorite, because we were discovering new species every year, and new corals, new fish. We found a new type of killer whale in Antarctica in 2020. I mean, we're not talking about...
I've got to underline this. There's a great story you tell in your book where one of the jobs you had was to do the soundings in the Persian Gulf when the Iraq War was happening. And the maps that you were relying on to guide vessels safely in and around the Persian Gulf, some of them were Admiralty UK maps from the 19th century. 1898, I think, was one of them. And the fact that the American military is launching a war in the Middle East, relying on maps from the British Army from over 100 years previously, is just extraordinary.
No, it was, and exactly. In fact, the Gulf War in 1990, our aircraft carriers had this very small area to operate, because the charts, most of the navigational information, the bathymetry was unknown. Like you said, it was 19th century. So, and when you're an aircraft carrier, because I've driven one, I was a deck officer on the USS Kitty Hawk during 2 combat deployments in the Arabian Gulf, that you have to have a lot of sea room, because aircraft need lift. And to get lift, you have to go fast. And that means 35 knots. And you don't really slow down fast when you're a 1,000-foot warship. So, and 100,000 tons. So that we needed a lot of sea room. We needed good maps or charts. And so what I did, for what it's worth, about, on this topic of the unknown ocean and learning more about UAP, if we discover the ocean more, is I mapped a lot of the Persian Gulf in my first operational sea tour with hydrographic sonar and an oceanographic ship. And then I came back later during the second Gulf War in 2003 and navigated off the charts I made personally. So that was a nice full circle. But you're right, the ocean's so unknown. And we know we're seeing a fair amount of UAP activity. It's been reported. Richard Dolan has a book coming out on all the UAP activity in and under the ocean that has been recorded over time, and it's about 600 cases over the last few centuries. A compendium of this, which is really worth getting. And I've seen the advanced copy of that, and it's remarkable. With that in mind, and knowing how big the ocean is and how opaque it is to our observational systems, there might be a lot more out there. And in fact, Ross, I just went to the National Academies. I'm a member of their Ocean Studies Board, and I gave them a presentation last week on this. And I made the statement, hey, these are phenomena that we're seeing in our ocean. You're the authoritative ocean science body in the U.S. And if you really want to know what's going on in the ocean, we should be looking at this. And they took that on board. I mean, they received it respectfully. I think it's so non-traditional that average oceanographers are going to have a hard time with that. But like we've talked about in this idea of thought leadership, I think it needs to get out there. And I'm going to have to make this statement often to get it more accepted over time.
So, Tim, can I get a clear statement from you about what your belief's the wrong word, because that's almost a religious faith thing. What do you know to be the case? What is your conclusion about the notion of there being a non-human intelligence engaging with this planet?
Right. So I have no personal interaction with any entities like that. Never seen or experienced a UAP, as a witness firsthand. However, one, I had this experience with Navy data on a secret network, which has come out to be validated in the New York Times and elsewhere. And so you have that. And then, of course, now you and I are both in a network of people that are very credible, that we've named names already, and I'm personally friends with. And I know their pedigrees better than the average person in the public because I worked in the agencies they worked at. David Grush, I had officers working in the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency under me. You have Brian Graves working on the USS Theodore Roosevelt. I had a ton of sailors on aircraft carriers. I was on an aircraft carrier. You have David Fravor. I had many people in squadrons supporting them with weather. They're all the real deal. Jay Stratton, I worked with the Office of Naval Intelligence and know the last 5 or so commanders of the Office of Naval Intelligence, on and on. And so all these people who are coming out, Carl Nell, I know the agencies they come from, and I totally respect their credibility when they say the statements. I have access to the knowledge. I have knowledge of the program, of the information, and I know how the government works for 40 years. So when these people do it, I totally trust it. So yeah, I know a lot of people say, hey, one of these guys is I won't name names, but okay, have you seen the craft? Have you seen the bodies? Okay, no, I've not, but I know enough about how things work, and I have many other people I will not name that have had access to the programs, and all of that makes me firmly believe what's going on, what we're covering up, and I'm coming out only because of my position as an authority, PhD, former agency head, undersecretary. Someone like me, people like me have to come out and give these individuals top cover for the courage they're showing in speaking up and seeking to overturn this government cover-up.
You tell an amazing story in your book, Tim, about your wife, Karen, and the vilification that she suffered as a woman serving in the US Navy. And it struck me there's parallels between her story and what she endured and what witnesses to the whole UAP subject have to endure, the stigmatizing, the ridicule, basically the vilification. Can you tell me a little bit about what happened to Karen? And can I also say I really admire her courage in being willing to allow you to talk about it in your book.
Well, this is 100% testament to her courage, because it's not easy for people who were subject to sexual harassment to talk about it. And they're made to feel like it was their fault. And this happened in the very early 90s. My wife was a Navy diver, which is very impressive. But at the time, Navy ships were just allowing women on board. And Navy combatants didn't allow women. So it was service ships like the salvage ship she was on. And her CO was one of these people who just couldn't accept women on ships. and so she dealt with a really difficult situation, and it got her to leave the Navy. It got her CO court-martialed for his bad, horrible harassment. And
I think I think I think just to underline how badly she was treated, am I right in saying she was fired by the CO on the tannoy, on the speaker system in the ship? He made this dramatic announcement on the vessel that she'd been, was it fired?
Yeah, that's right. And she has really a hard. Again, I applaud her for allowing me to share that story, because she feels so terrible about this. It was a dark time in her life, and but the point exactly right. It was so tough for her, but she's come out because we know that if we can tell her story, it'll give others courage, not just for, again, the sexual harassment, combating that, which I've been a giant advocate to eliminate in everywhere I've been in government. But at the same time, you're right. It's exactly what's going on with experiencers and witnesses, that they're being discredited and vilified. And yeah, and it's gosh, human behavior can be so vile at times. And so I thank you for highlighting the importance of embracing and allowing people to come forward and show courage. And that's exactly what I'm doing here and why I'm on your show.
So, Tim, can I be a devil's advocate for a moment? Let's assume the best of motives for the people who have improperly, I think, concealed this from Congress and kept it from some of the presidents that have served as commander-in-chief. Let's assume for a moment that these people are well motivated, and that, albeit they're possibly doing this illegally and in some cases criminally, they're doing it for what they regard as the best of motives. You're a person who's schooled and steeped in the need for secrecy. There's very good reasons for why we have special access programs and national security secrets. At the heart of this, do you think the public can be told, if it's true, that there is a non-human intelligence engaging with this planet, and we wouldn't run the risk of jeopardizing the technologies and the, if you like, the breakthroughs that we might have developed from that understanding that we are trying to still keep secret from our adversaries?
I do. And I do accept that there are probably individuals in the programs, and their intent is maybe well-meaning. And I mean, this was our culture, is secrecy and classification to protect our national security. So I get that. But I think Carl Nell, who was on the UAP task force, the Army representative, uh, eloquent speaker at the last SALT conference and the previous Soul Foundation symposium, he articulated it superbly. And that is, the government does not have an exclusive right on the nature of reality. And we're a government by the people and for the people, and the people should know about the nature of reality. And this is important, as he says, for the pursuit of happiness, which I totally agree with. I mean, I really just that's been a really neat thing about this journey, is I've been able to work with such superior minds and professionals like Carl and you, and so that's just a statement I stand behind.
Well, that's very kind of you, sir. I mean, I have to admit, there's a lot of people who are going to be watching your congressional appearance who are on the inside still. I mean, I'm talking to people who are inside the legacy program, who are waiting for a sign that Congress is genuinely serious about engaging with this issue. And there's been a lot of flip-flopping. You get the knocking back of the Schumer Amendment in December 2023, which was a huge setback, I think. I rather suspect that if the Schumer Amendment had been passed last year, President Biden might very well have been saying something different this year. But we've had nothing from Kamala Harris. We've had nothing from President Biden on the UAP subject. Is it your hope that whatever happens in the coming election, whoever is president might be more willing to be more open with the public?
Yes, Ross, that's a great question. I'm taking a longer view on this, because there's just the current geopolitical situation is really is dire, to be honest with you, that it's going to be hard to make UAP rise to that level, even though I would warrant that I think what's really going on is even more serious than what's happening with Ukraine, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. But yeah. So, but ultimately, in terms of just a government policy decision or change. I'm not sure it's going to happen soon, so I don't want to pin my hopes on some immediate or near-term reversal. Again, because I know how administrations work, and I think it's just going to take a change in the electorate. It's going to take more constituents wanting the government to know. We've come a long way, and I think that's very encouraging. I mean, Avi Loeb, I think, cited this, and I can't vouch for the veracity of it, but I think recently he said something that more people believe that there might be extraterrestrial life than those who believe in God or religion. I don't know, but there's a new understanding and openness, and it's here's something I think is really neat. One of the Soul Foundation's advisors is a woman named Ia Whiteley, an aviation psychologist and works on space, also psychology, and really brilliant woman. And I loved her framing of this situation right now. She said, and she compared the current, actually it was Diana Pasulka who talked about Ia's observation, and she put it in the context of UAP, and it was this, that in aviation safety, it took a generational shift, about a professional generation of 25 years, to go from an attitude of aviators in the cockpit to not want to report safety concerns because they were macho or thought it would reflect poorly on their professional opportunities in the future, to become religiously reporting about cockpit safety to ensure safety of flight, and that's the standard now. And I think we're seeing young people show interest. I have them coming to me in good numbers. I want to study UAP, and is there a master's degree program out there? And I want to get involved. I mean, and I have so many people just coming to me because they want to contribute, and these are professionals in every walk of life. Okay, we're not talking about fringe nutcases. We're talking about really established people, some in the government, some in industry, and they're all coming to me in various forms saying, what can I do? And so that generational shift, maybe in a decade or two, is going to be where our elected officials have no choice. They're going to have to be open about what is happening, to some degree.
It must have occurred to you, Tim, throughout your career. I mean, obviously, the coming to the UAP issue happened to you quite late in your career as a Rear Admiral. But there must have been people throughout your career who were aware of the secrets within the legacy program that's still being concealed. And one of the things I find delicious in your book is that you do describe meeting people like General John Kelly, Admiral Bill McRaven, who was the commander of the SEAL team that took out bin Laden. Have you ever regretted along the way not having the opportunity to learn about the UAP subject earlier and to have a quiet chat with people like that and say, hey, listen, what do you know about this subject? Did you ever ask that question to senior commanders and get interesting answers?
No, I wasn't tracking it at a professional level. I'd always been interested, but no. And funny, and it was only after I left the government. I actually did sit down with a former Office of Naval Intelligence commander, and we talked about some professional things. And then I asked him, hey, off the record, what do you think? And he goes, we still don't know what these are. And that is the state of play right now. And you've heard people like former DNI Clapper say this, and others, Avril Haines, the current DNI. So they've all gone on the record at some point and said, we don't know. And that's the state of understanding I understand now, which is a nice way to wrap this up because, okay, we don't know the nature of reality. We don't even know the nature of what's going on in our airspace and water space. Wouldn't an open research program into this be valid and important and useful? I think the answer is yes. So more universities that get into this, the more government funding with science agencies like my former one, NOAA, to explore this. That's what I'd like to see.
So, Tim, I can't finish this interview without pointing out the illustrious family name that you belong to and the fact that it has a very interesting connection to Lockheed Martin. And you've explained that you're adopted, and you tell a beautiful story in the book about how you met your birth mum. But the adoptive parents, the Gallaudets, that you became a part of their family, they were originally French. One of them fought in the Battle of Trenton in 1776 and became the personal secretary to George Washington. You had an uncle who was the engraver of the first US coin, the 1776 Continental Dollar. And then working through the family, one of the successors in the family, Edson Gallaudet, a contemporary of the Wright brothers, no less, designed the fastest aircraft in the world at the time, called the A-1 Gallaudet Bullet. And he built aircraft for the Navy and the Army through the 20s. And this is just too good not to mention in passing. His company later merged with others to eventually become General Dynamics, and later, drumroll, Lockheed Martin. Tim, you could have been in charge of Lockheed Martin, mate. You could have been one of the gatekeepers holding this secret, saying there's no bloody way we're telling these people this story.
Yeah, it's too coincidental.
It's a proud family history.
Yeah. Oh, it's interesting. Yeah. And funny about that, because we believe there might be they might possess some information or materials, and that's still coming out there. But yeah, who knows? Maybe I would have had a chance to oversee some of this if I stayed with the business.
Well, I have every confidence, Tim, that you would have heeded your oath as an officer and made sure that the Congress and the President were fully informed, as your Constitution requires. Sir, I thank you so much for joining Reality Check again, and I wish you the very best on behalf of, no doubt, a constituency of people watching this who want your evidence before the Congressional Committee to be fulsome and informative. So Godspeed, good luck, and congratulations on your openness and your candor.
Thank you so much, Ross. It's been great to be with you.
Thank you. Thanks for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And please don't forget to click that red subscribe button to ensure you get more of NewsNation's unbiased and fact-driven news coverage.